The first time I saw the footage, I could hardly believe my eyes. A familiar face, the woman the world had long celebrated as a symbol of grace and poise, was behaving in a way that seemed unrecognizable. Was this really the Meghan Markle we all thought we knew? The one smiling for the cameras, attending galas, and charming royalty and Hollywood alike? Or was this a side of her carefully hidden, now exposed in a series of moments too shocking to ignore? You might ask yourself, could someone with so much visibility, so much scrutiny, really act like this? I asked the same question over and over while watching, heart racing, the secret footage director Jason Orley had risked everything to capture at Amazon MGM Studios. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine walking onto a set, a place that is supposed to be orderly, buzzing with creativity, yet underneath the bright lights and polished sets, a storm brews. Whispers ripple across the sound stages. Eyes dart nervously. Crew members, some veterans of Hollywood productions who have seen it all, suddenly behave like newcomers, uncertain, tense, almost afraid to speak. And in the middle of it all is Meghan Markle, calm, composed, but with an intensity in her gaze that suggests power not just over performance, but over people themselves. You have to understand the gravity of what this footage shows. It's not a Hollywood feud. It's not a rumor circulating backstage. This is behavior documented, recorded in real time, in a professional studio environment where expectations are clear, collaboration, respect, and safety. And yet, what Orley captured could make even the most seasoned professionals pause. Imagine your manager, your director, someone you've respected, suddenly revealing a side that undermines everything you thought you knew. That's what happened here. Except the manager in question happens to be a global figure whose every public action is scrutinized, analyzed, and discussed endlessly. The story begins months before the footage ever surfaced. Jason Orley, a director with a reputation for excellence and integrity, had been brought onto a major project at Amazon MGM Studios. It was meant to be a high-profile collaboration, a production with the kind of star power that could define careers. Orley, known for pushing boundaries and capturing authentic performances, found himself in the middle of what initially seemed like minor tensions. At first, subtle interactions between the lead and the staff. A sharp tone here, a pointed comment there, were dismissed as stress or miscommunication. But over time, patterns emerged. What was once occasional and seemingly inconsequential began to feel deliberate, targeted, and chillingly systematic. Orley started noticing the small things first. Assistants flinching when she entered the room, technicians whispering urgently to each other, moments of sudden silence that dropped like a cold shadow whenever she appeared. It wasn't just staff discomfort. It was fear, and it was real. But capturing this reality, especially involving someone of her stature, was not only risky, it was career-threatening. One wrong step, one leaked frame, and Orley could have been vilified, sued, or blacklisted. Yet the director felt a responsibility, a need to document the truth. This wasn't about gossip, it was about accountability. And then came the secret video. Hidden cameras, discreet angles, every precaution taken to avoid detection. What Orley recorded was not sensationalized or dramatized. It was raw, authentic, and undeniably shocking. Scenes of staff being verbally berated, moments of intimidation so subtle, yet so impactful that employees were left questioning themselves. In one clip, a production assistant hesitates before delivering a line, only to be met with a glare and a comment that cuts deeper than words. If you can't handle this, maybe you shouldn't be here. It sounds almost banal when recounted, but the effect on the individual and on the team was devastating. This wasn't just workplace criticism. It was control, manipulation, and emotional domination. You might be asking, why would anyone risk capturing this footage? Why now? And that is where Jason Orley's story becomes almost as compelling as what he recorded. Orley has spent decades in Hollywood, navigating complex hierarchies, delicate egos, and high-stakes productions. He has seen talented stars crash under pressure, witnessed directors struggle with unruly sets, and endured countless negotiations over creative control. Yet what he encountered here transcended ordinary difficulties. The behavior was patterned, repeated, and aimed not at artistic excellence, but at asserting dominance over staff who had no way to defend themselves. The implications of this footage are massive. Amazon MGM Studios is a titan in the entertainment industry. A scandal involving such behavior could reverberate across Hollywood, affecting not only ongoing projects but the reputations of those involved. And because this concerns someone of Meghan Markle's global visibility, the stakes extend far beyond the studio lot. Public perception, royal image, media narratives, all are entwined. Every clip Orley captured holds the potential to reshape conversations about celebrity accountability, workplace ethics, and the intersection of power and privilege. Consider the first time Orley reviewed the footage in private. Alone in a dimly lit editing room, he replayed the moments, frame by frame. What he saw made his pulse quicken, but it also filled him with a profound unease. This wasn't about sensationalizing behavior for clicks or headlines. It was about truth. And the truth, when wielded carefully, carries weight. It challenges narratives. It forces conversations. And in this case, it set the stage for an unprecedented legal confrontation. But it wasn't just the recorded behavior that was shocking. It was the subtle cues that indicated staff had been silenced long before Orley entered the picture. Whispers of HR complaints ignored, subtle dismissals, and an unspoken culture of compliance revealed a systemic problem. People were scared. They were afraid of repercussions, afraid of jeopardizing careers, afraid of the consequences of speaking up. And then, in walked a director willing to expose it all, camera rolling, evidence preserved. This isn't a story about Hollywood glamour. It's not about red carpets, award shows, or perfectly staged photos. It's about people, real people, navigating fear in an environment where power is concentrated, visibility is high, and the consequences of speaking out can be career-ending. And it's about one director's courage to risk everything to ensure that truth could not be ignored. From the moment this footage went public, the stakes escalated rapidly. Legal teams mobilized. Statements were drafted. Lawyers circled, both defending and threatening. And through it all, the narrative in the public eye remained fragmented, distorted by incomplete information and speculation. What audiences would eventually see was only the beginning, a mere glimpse of the full story that Orley had painstakingly captured. And yet, even as the legal proceedings loom and media coverage explodes, one question remains at the center of this unfolding drama. How did someone so celebrated, so visible, cultivate this kind of power over a professional environment? Was it a pattern isolated to this project, or part of a larger, more systemic behavior? And what does it say about accountability in spaces where fame and privilege intersect with daily workplace dynamics? The secret footage is not just compelling. It is a wake-up call. It challenges assumptions, forces reflection, and demands that audiences reconsider what they think they know about celebrity behavior, leadership, and power dynamics. And while the clips themselves are shocking, the real tension lies in what comes next. The legal battle, the public reaction, and the potential fallout for everyone involved, from staff who have endured this treatment, to the studio navigating a corporate crisis, to Meghan Markle herself. And that is where the real cliffhanger begins. Because what Jason Orley captured is only the start. The moment this footage was reviewed, analyzed, and prepared for court, a chain reaction began. One that would shake the very foundations of Amazon MGM Studios, ignite debates across Hollywood, and place Meghan Markle under an unprecedented spotlight. The gleaming lights of Amazon MGM Studios shine brightly over a sprawling set, a place designed for creativity, collaboration, and cinematic magic. From the outside, everything looks perfect. The kind of place you'd imagine stars laughing between takes, directors orchestrating chaos with flair, and staff bustling confidently, knowing exactly what needs to be done. It's the Hollywood dream. Polished floors, elaborate props, and a hum of productivity that promises nothing but success. But as the saying goes, appearances can be deceiving. And in this story, that deception is layered, insidious, and quietly terrifying. On that particular day, the atmosphere was off. Staff members moved with a subtle tension that most would barely notice. The makeup artists worked silently, pausing mid-stroke, glancing toward a particular corridor. Crew members whispered hurriedly. then scattered when footsteps echoed across the studio. And there, walking with measured steps, was Meghan Markle. Her poise was flawless, her smile impeccable. Every camera that might have captured her was met with the perfect angle, the ideal expression. Yet beneath that surface, there was a ripple of something darker. A tension no lighting setup, no director's charm, could mask. The set had been humming with anticipation all morning. This was a major shoot, a collaboration that promised industry buzz and social media virality. Jason Orley, the director, had arrived early as usual. He was a man whose reputation for storytelling excellence was only matched by his instinct for sensing underlying tension. On first glance, nothing seemed out of place. Yet as he began walking the set, observing interactions, subtle patterns started emerging. It was the little things at first, a flinch when someone addressed her, a sharp intake of breath, a momentary pause before following an instruction. Orley had seen these behaviors before in different contexts. But the consistency here was alarming. Every crew member he passed seemed to hold their breath, as if daring not to make a misstep. The weight of Meghan Markle's presence hung in the air like an invisible force. Orley had directed some of the biggest names in Hollywood. He knew the high-pressure environment, the egos, the tempers that flared and fizzled without consequence. But this was different. The tension was not about perfection or artistry. It was about control. And the control was unmistakably one-sided. He began to pay closer attention. Assistant after assistant was subtly undermined. A line read incorrectly? Not a casual correction. A quietly muttered remark, loaded with implication, delivered in a tone so calm it could pass unnoticed to an outsider. But to the recipient, it cut deep. Technicians who had years of experience looked hesitant, double-checking their work repeatedly, unsure if it was enough. Orley realized this wasn't just a case of stress or high stakes. It was something far more deliberate, and it had a chilling effect. Staff who had once joked together were now silent, hyper-aware of every glance, every inflection. Productivity didn't just stall, it quivered. Confidence eroded before it even had a chance to shine. And yet, no one spoke up. Not openly. Not yet. Because the stakes were enormous. The lead star, someone of Meghan Markle's stature, held not only creative control, but also social leverage that could make or break careers. Speaking out could result in a whisper campaign, career setbacks, or worse, being labeled as difficult, uncooperative, or unprofessional. The calm before the storm, Orley thought, is always deceptive. On paper, this shoot should have been a dream. The set was equipped with the best technology, the crew was seasoned, the project ambitious. And yet, the human element, the subtle undercurrents of fear, compliance, and intimidation, was quietly reshaping the environment. In the early hours, Orley noticed other patterns too. A producer lingered uncomfortably in the background, eyes darting between Meghan and the assistants. A lighting technician adjusted angles more often than necessary, as if trying to avoid catching her attention. Even the director of photography, someone known for calm composure, seemed cautious, almost tense. The invisible web of control was far-reaching, touching every layer of the production hierarchy. There was a moment that made Orley pause completely. An assistant had misaligned a prop. Normally, such a minor error would be corrected with a word or gesture. Instead, Meghan's response was a slow, deliberate sigh, followed by a cutting comment that was ostensibly constructive but unmistakably demeaning. The assistant's hands trembled slightly as she fixed the prop, face pale, lips pressed in an effort to hold back tears. It was in these moments Orley realized he could no longer ignore what was happening. The staff weren't just anxious. They were being bullied, coerced in a subtle yet powerful manner that left them questioning themselves at every step. And the director, whose responsibility was to ensure the creative process ran smoothly, faced a moral dilemma. Intervene and risk the wrath of one of the most powerful women in the public eye, or observe, document, and hope that by capturing the truth, justice could eventually prevail. Orley's decision to document began with small steps. A few discrete notes, observations about the patterns of behavior, moments that, while seemingly minor, added up to a picture of systematic intimidation. Each whisper, each glance, Each carefully crafted comment was another piece of a puzzle that revealed a disturbing reality. This was not spontaneous frustration. It was intentional, targeted, and sustained. Staff members began confiding in Orley in hushed tones. Anonymous comments about feeling belittled, about being afraid to speak up, about the impact on their mental health. These testimonies, though informal at first, painted a picture of an environment poisoned by fear and manipulation. Orley listened carefully, recording every detail mentally, aware that one day this documentation could be crucial. And yet, the set continued as if nothing were wrong. To an outsider, it was business as usual. Cameras rolled, scenes were filmed, lines were delivered, smiles were exchanged for the cameras. But behind the glamour, a silent storm was building. The calm was only a veneer, a fragile mask over a reality that few dared to confront. By midday, Orley knew that capturing evidence was no longer optional. It was imperative. The pattern of intimidation was so pervasive that without documentation, these staffers' experiences could be dismissed as exaggeration or misunderstanding. The risk was high, the stakes enormous, but so was the responsibility. And so, with careful planning, Orley began setting the stage for what would become one of the most consequential pieces of secret footage ever recorded in Hollywood. The calm, he realized, was ending. The storm was approaching. Every glance, every word, every tense interaction was part of a larger narrative that would soon erupt, exposing behavior that the public, the media, and perhaps even the royal world had never imagined. And just as the first signs of this storm began to surface, a crew member whispered a warning that made Orley's stomach tighten. She's noticing people are watching her differently, and she's not going to like it. That was the moment the calm shattered, and the first domino fell. Jason Orley sat alone, reviewing scripts, schedules, and production notes for the upcoming Amazon MGM project. On the surface, it looked like any other planning session. But Orley wasn't just a director. He was a man who had built his reputation on noticing what others didn't. Every nuance, every hesitation, every unspoken tension drew his attention. It was a skill honed over decades of directing high-profile films and series. And it was exactly this skill that would bring him face-to-face with a situation he never expected. Orley's career had been defined by a mix of daring creativity and meticulous observation. He was the director actors adored and feared, the one who could coax the rawest, most authentic performances out of people. But what he encountered at Amazon MGM was not about artistry. It was about control, intimidation, and a subtler kind of manipulation that preyed on the human psyche. At first, the signs were faint, a fleeting glare, a whispered remark. But for someone like Orley, trained to read patterns, the picture emerged quickly. He had been contacted to helm a large-scale production, one that promised both acclaim and visibility. On paper, it was a dream project, a talented cast, cutting-edge technology, and the full support of studio executives. Yet as he stepped onto the set for the first time, Orley sensed something amiss. There was a tension in the air, an almost imperceptible hum of unease among the crew. And then he saw her, Meghan Markle, moving gracefully across the set, her presence commanding, her eyes sharp, and her smile carefully measured. To the public, she appeared composed, charming, and professional. But Orley's instincts, honed by years of navigating complex on-set dynamics, warned him that there was another side. The first days of shooting were telling. Subtle exchanges between Meghan and the crew began to reveal a pattern. Orley noticed that even experienced assistants hesitated when addressing her. A line read wrong, a glance misunderstood. It wasn't met with simple correction or guidance. It was met with a piercing intensity, calculated and deliberate. Each interaction seemed designed to assert dominance, to instill uncertainty. Orley watched quietly, analyzing every detail, weighing the consequences of speaking up. His decision to observe rather than confront was strategic. Confronting someone of Meghan's stature, without evidence, could end his career. But documenting behavior, that was different. It required patience, foresight, and careful planning. Orley began recording observations meticulously. He noted every tense exchange, every flinch, every whispered reaction among the staff. It became clear, this was not random. It was deliberate, systematic, and escalating. One afternoon, A production assistant made a small error while adjusting a prop. Normally, such a mistake would warrant a brief correction or a lighthearted comment. Instead, Meghan's reaction was slow and deliberate. A controlled sigh followed by a seemingly innocent question that carried a sharp edge. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" she asked. The assistant froze, hands trembling slightly as she corrected the error. The subtle intimidation was undeniable. Orley knew he had witnessed something significant. As the week progressed, Orley began thinking about ways to capture evidence discreetly. The stakes were high. This wasn't just about office drama or creative differences. The behavior was affecting staff morale, mental health, and the overall production environment. And Orley had a responsibility, not only as a director but as a human being, to ensure that what was happening didn't go unrecorded. Orley started planning. He considered placement of cameras, angles that would capture interactions without drawing attention, and strategies to ensure staff confidentiality. He spoke quietly to a few trusted crew members, gauging reactions and ensuring that anyone involved understood the risks. The process required patience. One wrong move, one miscalculated angle, and the effort could collapse. But Orley was determined. He also began to notice patterns that went beyond simple intimidation. Certain staff members were consistently targeted: junior assistants, interns, and those least likely to have leverage in the studio. Comments that seemed casual were often loaded with implications, and subtle gestures reinforced the hierarchy in ways that were psychologically taxing. Orley realized that this was more than a momentary lapse or high-pressure behavior. This was a sustained environment of coercion, and it needed to be documented. One evening, after a particularly long day, Orley sat in the empty studio, reviewing notes and footage from rehearsal. He felt the weight of responsibility. The staff had no way to defend themselves publicly, and yet the truth was there, in every interaction, every micro-expression, every silent reaction. He understood the implications. Releasing this footage, or even preparing it for legal scrutiny, would set off a firestorm. Careers, reputations, and public perceptions hung in the balance. Orley's colleagues began noticing changes in his behavior. He was quieter, more introspective, yet laser-focused. He spent hours reviewing interactions, noting not only what was said but how it was said, the pauses, the tone, the body language. He understood that the power dynamics at play were subtle, sophisticated, and potentially damaging. And he also knew that capturing the full scope would require both courage and discretion. The first test came when Meghan issued a particularly sharp critique to a group of assistants. Orley positioned himself strategically, ensuring that he could record the interaction without interference. What he captured was both chilling and telling. A measured assertion of authority that left staff visibly shaken, a demonstration of control that was almost surgical in its precision. He watched, heart pounding, as the assistant's confidence faltered. The camera rolled, the evidence accumulating. Orley's role was no longer simply to direct the production. It had become a mission to preserve the truth, protect those vulnerable, and ensure that the dynamics on set were not dismissed as misunderstandings or normal workplace stress. Every day, the tension mounted. Every interaction added weight to the growing body of evidence. Orley knew that what he was documenting could have profound consequences for the studio, the staff, and Meghan Markle herself. Yet despite the pressure, Orley maintained professionalism. He never allowed personal bias to cloud judgment. He understood that the footage must speak for itself. Objective, unembellished, and clear. And as he captured more interactions, a clearer picture emerged: the pattern of intimidation, the consistency of behavior, and the psychological impact on staff. It was undeniable. By the end of the second week, Orley had compiled enough observations and discrete recordings to establish a credible record. He realized that this was no longer simply a case of behind-the-scenes tension. It was evidence of a systemic problem, one that could not be ignored. And with that realization came the decision that would define the coming weeks. He would take action. Jason Orley had always believed that accountability matters, that truth carries weight, and that silence in the face of misconduct is complicity. In documenting these interactions, he was not seeking fame, revenge, or publicity. He was seeking justice for those who had no voice, for those whose experiences had been minimized, dismissed, or overlooked. And in taking this stance, Orley knew he was entering dangerous territory. The risks were immense. The backlash could be devastating. But the alternative, ignoring the evidence, was unthinkable. And so, the quiet, calculated entry of Jason Orley onto the MGM set became the catalyst for a story that would soon shake Hollywood, challenge public perceptions, and place Meghan Markle under scrutiny like never before. Every frame, every whispered comment, every subtle act of intimidation had been captured. And while the full consequences were yet to unfold, one thing was certain. The calm before the storm was over, and the storm itself had begun. Jason Orley had spent days observing, documenting, and mentally cataloging interactions on the set of the Amazon MGM production. Every glance, every whispered remark, every subtle intimidation tactic had been noted meticulously. But now, Orley faced a crucial decision. Observation alone would not be enough. The subtle acts of coercion and emotional manipulation were powerful, but without concrete evidence, they could be dismissed as perception, as normal high-pressure behavior, or even as misunderstandings. To bring clarity to the situation and protect the staff, Orley knew he had to capture it all on video. The secret video wasn't conceived impulsively. Orley understood the magnitude of what he was about to do. He knew that if discovered, it could end his career instantly, expose him to lawsuits, and put him in the crosshairs of powerful representatives. Yet, the ethical imperative was clear. The truth needed to be documented, preserved, and, if necessary, revealed. Staff morale, mental health, and workplace integrity were at stake. This was no longer about directing a production. It was about accountability and justice. Orley carefully planned the filming. Cameras were positioned discreetly in corners that wouldn't draw attention. Microphones captured audio without interfering with the set. Crew members who were aware of the plan were sworn to strict confidentiality, understanding the risks involved. Every precaution was taken to ensure the footage would be secure, credible, and above all, unobtrusive. The first day of recording was tense. The staff moved through their routines, conscious of their roles, yet unaware that history was being documented. And then it happened. Meghan Markle, seemingly calm and professional, began engaging with the assistants in ways that would, on camera, appear subtle but were unmistakably coercive. A simple instruction became a layered critique, delivered with a tone that undercut confidence and instilled self-doubt. One junior assistant hesitated over a line delivery, and her small misstep was met with a controlled sigh, a pointed glance, and a comment that cut deeper than words alone could convey. "You really need to focus. This isn't difficult if you're paying attention." Orley captured every second, knowing that each frame contributed to the larger narrative. To the public, the words might seem mild, almost routine, but the psychological effect on the staff was palpable. Trembling hands, downcast eyes, and suppressed exasperation revealed the emotional weight carried by those on the receiving end. The footage wasn't sensationalized or dramatized. It was raw, authentic, and deeply revealing. Over the following days, the video accumulated. Scenes showed Meghan strategically asserting dominance over certain staff members, often choosing moments when they were least prepared. Instructions that should have been straightforward were delivered with condescension. Critiques were couched in patronizing language. Staff members, even those with years of experience, appeared anxious, unsure, and hesitant. Orley, reviewing the footage, realized that what he was documenting was not isolated incidents. It was a systematic pattern of intimidation and control. The footage also revealed subtleties that words alone could not capture. Meghan's body language, her measured glances, the calculated pauses, these visual cues amplified the psychological effect on staff. Orley noted these details carefully, understanding that they provided undeniable context for the behavior, offering a fuller picture than written accounts alone could convey. It was a masterclass in nonverbal communication, and unfortunately, it demonstrated a consistent pattern of manipulation. Orley also captured reactions from staff in real time. The silent hesitation before responding, the subtle flinches, the quiet sighs, and the moments of visible tension. All became evidence of the emotional impact. In some cases, staff members attempted to mask their discomfort, but the cameras caught what human eyes often miss: the micro-expressions, the fleeting moments of stress, the unconscious signs of fear. These moments, though brief, spoke volumes. One particular clip stood out. An assistant, relatively new to the industry, misread a cue during a rehearsal. Meghan's response was calm, deliberate, and seemingly measured. But in the context of tone, posture, and expression, it conveyed authority, disapproval, and subtle intimidation. The assistant's hands shook as she corrected her mistake, and Orley could see the toll it took on her confidence. The camera preserved every nuance, every microexpression, every second of psychological pressure. The secret video also captured interactions that staff had feared discussing publicly. Complaints whispered in corridors, small grievances, and subtle acts of favoritism. All were documented without altering reality. Orley recognized the importance of preserving authenticity. There was no editing for drama, no selective amplification. What was captured was what transpired, exactly as it happened. The result was footage that could withstand scrutiny, that could tell the story of staff experiences in a way that words, rumors, or hearsay could not. Security and confidentiality were paramount. Orley implemented strict protocols. Encrypted storage, limited access, and meticulous tracking of the footage's chain of custody. He understood the magnitude of what he was doing. This was not simply a production decision. It was a documentation of workplace behavior with potential legal implications. One misstep could compromise the integrity of the evidence or put him and the staff at risk. As the days progressed, the footage became more revealing. Patterns of behavior emerged with clarity. Certain staff were consistently singled out, critiques were delivered in a way that undermined confidence, and small tasks became opportunities for public correction or subtle humiliation. The cumulative effect was visible on the faces of those involved. Orley, reviewing the footage, recognized the profound psychological impact, the quiet fear, and the erosion of workplace trust. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on Orley. He understood that when this footage was eventually reviewed outside the studio, it would provoke shock, disbelief, and controversy. The public perception of Meghan Markle as charming, composed, and professional would be directly challenged by evidence of her behavior behind closed doors. And while Orley was documenting the truth for staff protection and accountability, he knew it would not be received lightly by the wider world. Yet, amidst the tension, there was a clarity of purpose. Orley was not motivated by sensationalism or personal vendetta. His goal was to ensure that the staff's experiences were recorded, validated, and could not be dismissed. The video was a testament to the reality of the set, capturing both the overt and subtle dynamics that define daily interactions. It was evidence, yes, but it was also a shield, a protection for those who had no other voice. And then came the moment that would truly shock Orley. In reviewing one sequence, Meghan's behavior escalated beyond subtle intimidation. A staff member had tried to offer a suggestion, only to be met with a glare and a comment that was calm on the surface but devastating in implication. The assistant's composure cracked, tears forming in her eyes as she struggled to maintain professionalism. Orley froze, knowing he had captured a moment that was undeniable. This was not mere criticism. This was a sustained exertion of power over a vulnerable individual. By the end of the week, Orley had amassed hours of footage. Each clip contributed to a narrative that was impossible to ignore. The secret video was more than just a record. It was a revelation, a visual document that told the story of what staff had been experiencing in whispers for months. And Orley knew that once this footage saw the light of day, the world would react in ways no one could predict. The secret video, meticulously captured, carefully preserved, and undeniable in its authenticity, became the fulcrum of the unfolding drama. It wasn't sensationalism. It was evidence. It wasn't opinion. It was fact. And the moment Orley prepared to reveal even a portion of it, the studio, the staff, and Meghan Markle herself would be thrust into a confrontation that would challenge perceptions, reputations, and the very dynamics of power in Hollywood. But what Orley didn't yet know was that releasing this evidence, even strategically, would trigger a chain reaction of events, legal maneuvers, and public scrutiny far beyond anything he had imagined. And when that day came, the consequences would be felt by everyone involved: staff, studio executives, and Meghan Markle herself. After days of observing, documenting, and filming, Jason Orley realized that the next critical step was giving the staff a voice. The secret video had captured the interactions, the glances, the micro-expressions, the subtle and not-so-subtle tactics of intimidation. But Orley knew that footage alone wasn't enough. To truly tell the story, he needed the perspectives of the people living it every day, the crew members who had endured these interactions behind the cameras, in the hallways, and in moments too brief for anyone outside the studio to notice. The first staff member to speak was hesitant, almost whispering, as if the very act of sharing could have repercussions. "I didn't know if I should say anything," she admitted, eyes downcast, hands twisting nervously. "Every time I tried to speak up, I felt like I was walking on a minefield. I didn't want to lose my job. I didn't want to be blacklisted. But it was affecting me every day." Her words, simple but filled with quiet desperation, encapsulated the lived reality of countless crew members on that set. Orley listened attentively, validating each emotion, each fear, each hesitation. He encouraged the staff to recount specific incidents. One assistant described being singled out during a rehearsal, her mistake minor, yet met with a stare so piercing it left her feeling paralyzed. "It's like she knew exactly how to make me doubt myself," the assistant explained. "Even when nothing was wrong, I felt like I was failing." Her voice cracked slightly, and Orley noticed tears pooling in her eyes. It was a moment of vulnerability, raw and unfiltered, that no footage could fully convey. Another crew member, a seasoned technician with over a decade of experience, shared a different perspective. "I've worked with difficult personalities before," he said, "but this was something else. It wasn't about pressure to perform, it was about control. Every word, every gesture seemed calculated to keep us on edge. It wasn't just intimidating, it was exhausting." He paused, shaking his head. "And the worst part? We couldn't talk about it. HR wasn't listening. Complaints were brushed aside. And you start to feel complicit, even though you're the one being victimized." Orley was struck by the consistency of the accounts. Different people, different roles, different experiences, but the underlying pattern was unmistakable. The staff weren't imagining it. They weren't overreacting. The intimidation was real, pervasive, and psychologically damaging. And it wasn't limited to one incident. It was a sustained campaign that subtly, methodically undermined confidence, created fear, and enforced compliance. The accounts also revealed moments of humiliation that were subtle yet impactful. One assistant described being corrected in front of others, her error exaggerated in tone and timing. "It wasn't just that I was wrong," she explained. "It was the way she delivered it, as if she wanted everyone else to see me fail." You start questioning yourself, wondering if you really are incompetent, even when you're doing everything right. Another staff member nodded in agreement, adding, "It's like you're on display all the time, and any small mistake becomes proof that you don't belong." The fear wasn't only emotional, it had practical consequences. Some staff began avoiding certain tasks or over-preparing, exhausting themselves in attempts to avoid criticism. Others considered leaving the project entirely, torn between loyalty, necessity, and self-preservation. Orley recognized that this was not mere stress. It was a systemic effect of sustained intimidation, captured vividly in both footage and testimony. Even those who tried to support their colleagues were subtly affected. Senior staff who attempted to mediate or offer guidance reported being ignored, dismissed, or subtly undermined. The ripple effect of one person's behavior extended far beyond individual interactions, creating a culture of fear and hypervigilance that permeated the entire set. Orley, listening to these accounts, realized the enormity of what he was documenting. This wasn't isolated incidents or personality clashes. It was a pattern of control that had real, measurable consequences for staff well-being and workplace integrity. Humor, irony, and disbelief surfaced in the testimonies as well. One assistant described a particularly absurd moment: being asked to redo a minor task multiple times while Meghan observed, all the while receiving comments that were almost polite on the surface but laced with subtle mockery. "It felt like a performance test designed to make me question my entire career," she said, laughter masking frustration. Another staff member recounted an interaction where a perfectly executed instruction was met with exaggerated sighs and eyebrow raises, leaving everyone nearby trying not to giggle at the absurdity while still feeling the weight of intimidation. These moments, while laced with humor, underscored the relentless nature of the environment. Orley encouraged staff to describe their experiences over time. Several recounted cumulative stress, sleepless nights, and anxiety about arriving on set. Some described physical symptoms, headaches, nausea, and tension resulting from the constant psychological pressure. One junior assistant admitted, "I started second-guessing everything I did, even outside of work. I'd rehearse conversations, practice lines, even imagine how she might react to trivial things. It was exhausting." The emotional weight was undeniable, and Orley carefully documented every account, knowing the value these testimonies would have alongside the secret footage. The staff also provided insight into the mechanisms of power at play. Control wasn't overt. It was subtle, strategic, and almost imperceptible to outsiders. Instructions were delivered with pauses, glances were loaded with unspoken meaning, and words were carefully chosen to both guide and intimidate. Orley recognized that this psychological sophistication made the behavior all the more difficult to confront or challenge. Staff were caught between compliance and self-preservation, unsure how to act without risk. Yet amidst fear, a quiet resilience emerged. Staff members described moments of solidarity, supporting each other, sharing tips, and quietly validating one another's experiences. Orley noted these moments as well, recognizing the courage it took to maintain professionalism and dignity in such an environment. These acts of mutual support, small as they seemed, highlighted the human element that footage alone could not capture. The quiet determination to survive, to perform, and to maintain integrity despite relentless pressure. Orley also conducted one-on-one sessions with staff willing to share more sensitive details. These conversations revealed deeper layers of emotional impact, including feelings of betrayal, loss of confidence, and fear of professional repercussions. One staff member admitted, "I started questioning my own abilities in ways I never have before. It wasn't just about her. It was about what she made me feel about myself. And that's terrifying." Another added, "You don't realize how much someone can affect your self-perception until it's happening every day. And you can't escape it, not even for a moment." These testimonies provided not only validation for what Orley had captured on camera, but also context for understanding the broader consequences. They painted a picture of a workplace environment where fear and intimidation had become normalized, and where staff lived in a state of hypervigilance. The psychological and emotional toll was evident, and Orley understood that this evidence, combined with the secret footage, would form a compelling narrative for accountability. As Chapter 4 closes, the cumulative effect of these accounts becomes clear. Staff bravery, coupled with meticulous documentation and hidden footage, sets the stage for a confrontation with the very behavior that had silenced them. These voices, once unheard, now form the backbone of a story that is impossible to ignore. And yet, even as the staff speak out, a new tension emerges. The moment these testimonies, alongside the secret video, reach legal scrutiny, powerful forces will mobilize. Lawyers, PR teams, and studio executives will all enter the fray, each with their own interests and strategies. The quiet courage of staff and the meticulous evidence Orley has gathered will collide with influence, power, and perception on an unprecedented scale. On the surface, both worlds are accustomed to high visibility, public scrutiny, and carefully managed images. But beneath the polished veneer, the cultures, expectations, and stakes differ dramatically. On the MGM set, this collision of worlds was not theoretical. It was unfolding in real time, and Jason Orley was at the eye of the storm. Hollywood operates on a delicate balance of creativity, deadlines, and human capital. Stars are expected to perform, but so are the crews supporting them. Pressure is high, mistakes are public, and reputations are fragile. Yet, there is a tacit understanding. While egos may flare, respect and collaboration remain essential. Directors, producers, and crew rely on trust, communication, and professionalism to navigate the chaos of production. It is a world that rewards talent but punishes toxic behavior, not because morality dictates, but because dysfunction undermines results. Royalty, on the other hand, is a world structured by hierarchy, visibility, and legacy. Protocol, expectation, and public perception guide behavior. Every word, every gesture, and every action is scrutinized by millions, both publicly and privately. Influence is immense, yet accountability is often mediated by advisors, publicists, and carefully crafted narratives. Personal actions are less likely to face immediate consequences, so long as the narrative in the public eye remains intact. The collision of these two worlds on the MGM set created a perfect storm. Staff accustomed to Hollywood norms found themselves navigating expectations rooted in royal experience. Orley noticed how this dynamic exacerbated tensions. A critique delivered with royal precision, calm, measured, yet unyielding, carried far more weight than any ordinary on-set comment. Crew members reported feeling outmaneuvered or cornered, not by Hollywood pressure, but by the subtle authority someone accustomed to wielding influence on a global stage could command. One assistant described the feeling vividly. In Hollywood, you can push back. You can negotiate, explain, or clarify. But with her, you felt every word was a test. One wrong syllable, one misstep, and it wasn't just a mistake. It was a reflection on you as a person. Another crew member compared the experience to walking a tightrope over a canyon. Visible, exposed, and with the constant threat of public humiliation. The psychological strain was extraordinary. Orley also began noticing subtle cultural cues. Meghan's background in high-profile diplomacy, public relations, and royal engagements had trained her to command attention while masking intent. On set, she leveraged this training masterfully. Instructions were precise, yet delivered in a tone that communicated far more than words. Glances, pauses, and controlled gestures conveyed authority, expectation, and disapproval simultaneously. The result was staff uncertainty, hesitation, and stress. An environment fertile for intimidation, whether intentional or not. From a Hollywood perspective, this behavior was alien. Experienced crew, accustomed to directness, creative chaos, and high-pressure critique, found themselves struggling to interpret subtle cues. A simple request or critique, when framed by royal-infused authority, became emotionally complex and psychologically taxing. Orley observed these dynamics carefully, understanding that the cultural collision amplified the impact of every interaction. The tension also highlighted contradictions in perception. Publicly, Meghan maintained her composed, approachable image. Cameras, interviews, and social media reinforced a narrative of charm, professionalism, and grace. Privately, behind the set walls, the dynamics were strikingly different. Staff accounts and secret footage revealed a pattern of subtle manipulation and intimidation that contradicted the public persona. Orley realized that this gap between public image and private behavior was not just remarkable, it was destabilizing for those navigating it daily. Legal experts would later note that the combination of Hollywood norms and royal behavior created a unique challenge. Traditional workplace policies often assume a uniform understanding of power dynamics and professional conduct. When those norms collide with behaviors informed by an entirely different sphere, royalty, diplomacy, or high-profile public relations, the interpretation of intent, impact, and responsibility becomes complex. Orley's documentation, both video and written, captured these nuances, providing clarity in a landscape otherwise muddied by assumptions. One incident in particular illustrated this cultural clash vividly. A junior staff member delivered a routine prop adjustment incorrectly. In a Hollywood context, a brief correction and guidance would have sufficed. Instead, the reaction, measured, deliberate, and laden with authority, conveyed far more than a mere critique. The staff member's response was immediate: visible tension, self-doubt, and hesitation in subsequent tasks. Orley recognized that the interaction's power came not from overt aggression, but from the authority derived from a mix of Hollywood visibility and royal comportment. The chapter also explores how these dual worlds affected morale and performance. Staff reported heightened anxiety, hypervigilance, and a constant need to anticipate expectations. The creative energy essential to a successful production was being diverted into navigating interpersonal dynamics, mitigating risk, and managing emotional stress. Orley noted that while technical performance remained high, the emotional toll was accumulating, creating a hidden crisis that only insiders fully understood. Humor, irony, and disbelief also emerged in staff reflections. One crew member recounted practicing lines in private, imagining the exact tone, gaze, and pause that would avoid perceived disapproval. Another described the absurdity of anticipating gestures and microexpressions while simultaneously managing props, lighting, and dialogue. These accounts, while tinged with humor, underscored the extraordinary psychological complexity imposed by the collision of Hollywood and royal behavioral norms. Orley's observations further revealed the strategic use of power. Meghan's behavior was not chaotic or reactive. It was deliberate, purposeful, and informed by awareness of staff sensitivities. Interactions were timed, measured, and framed to maintain authority, test compliance, and subtly reinforce hierarchies. In this context, even small corrections became instruments of control, and staff compliance, rather than engagement, became the measurable outcome. The broader implications were clear. The combination of Hollywood and royal influences created an environment where staff were disoriented, uncertain, and emotionally taxed. Authority was amplified by celebrity and public stature, making traditional methods of confrontation, mediation, or recourse difficult. Orley's role as observer and documenter became increasingly crucial, not only to protect staff, but to establish a factual record of behavior that transcended subjective interpretation. By the chapter's end, the stakes were evident. Hollywood and royalty had collided on a single set, creating a unique power dynamic with profound consequences. Staff were navigating psychological complexity beyond ordinary workplace norms. Orley was documenting it meticulously, understanding that what he captured would later challenge assumptions, inform legal proceedings, and provoke public debate. And just as Orley prepared for the next phase, documenting interactions for legal scrutiny, the first hint of an external threat emerged: whispers of corporate awareness, studio concerns, and the potential for PR intervention. The calm of observation was over. What followed would escalate beyond set dynamics, into legal battles, public scrutiny, and a confrontation that neither Hollywood nor royalty had anticipated. The secret footage that Jason Orley had meticulously captured, coupled with staff testimonies, had begun circulating within the studio's legal and executive teams. For the first time, the implications of the evidence were being considered not just as internal matters, but as potential legal threats with enormous ramifications. What had started as a director's effort to document behavior was now poised to trigger one of the most consequential confrontations in Hollywood history. The first warning came discreetly. A senior studio attorney, typically measured and unflappable, requested a private meeting with Orley. The tone was formal, the language precise, but the message was clear. Someone of Meghan Markle's stature was aware that staff accounts and Orley's documentation were being compiled, and legal representation was actively preparing to challenge, suppress, or discredit any evidence that might emerge. Orley listened carefully, aware that even one misstep could compromise the integrity of the footage or place him and staff members at risk. Legal threats in Hollywood are rarely subtle. Lawyers drafted cease and desist letters, preemptive claims of defamation, and warnings about confidentiality breaches. Each communication was precise, formal, and intimidating, crafted to halt momentum before scrutiny could escalate. But Orley understood the distinction between intimidation and truth. The footage he had captured wasn't about opinion or conjecture. It was objective evidence of behavior witnessed in real time. Yet, navigating the legal minefield required not only courage but strategic foresight. As word of the potential litigation reached senior production staff, an intricate dance began. Executives scrambled to assess risk, balancing the reputational stakes of public exposure against the legal ramifications of a high-profile lawsuit. The production team, caught between loyalty, risk management, and corporate responsibility, faced impossible choices. And in the midst of this, the staff who had bravely spoken out were reminded of the power dynamics that had silenced them for months. Their voices, though critical, were now entwined with the threat of legal repercussions. Orley recognized that this phase of the confrontation was as much about psychology as legality. Legal maneuvers, threats of injunctions, implied consequences for breach of contract, and the looming specter of litigation were designed to intimidate, to create doubt, and to discourage further action. Staff morale, already fragile from direct interactions with Meghan Markle, faced an added layer of stress. Even those with the courage to testify began second-guessing themselves, weighing personal risk against the importance of accountability. But Orley was unyielding. He had prepared for this phase meticulously. Legal counsel was consulted in advance, ensuring that every step, from storage of footage to witness statements, was defensible, verifiable, and compliant with the law. The objective was clear: preserve the integrity of the evidence, protect staff, and ensure that accountability could not be evaded through legal intimidation. The legal dimension also revealed unexpected strategic complexities. Meghan Markle's representatives were adept at navigating media narratives, contractual obligations, and public perception. Threats were not limited to court filings. They included implied reputational consequences, the potential to influence Hollywood executives, and strategic pressure on media outlets. Orley realized that confronting this system required not only legal rigor, but an understanding of influence, perception, and the intersection of celebrity and accountability. An early confrontation exemplified this tension. A senior producer warned Orley that any public disclosure without prior clearance could result in immediate legal action, potentially involving cease and desist orders or defamation claims. Orley responded cautiously but firmly. The footage and testimonies were not tools for sensationalism. They were evidence of systemic workplace behavior. The producer, recognizing Orley's resolve, reluctantly agreed to support a strategy that would protect both the staff and the credibility of the documentation. The stakes continued to escalate as Orley prepared to compile the evidence for formal review. Every clip, every testimony, every observation had to be cataloged with precision. Metadata, timestamps, and cross-references became essential. Legal counsel emphasized that credibility would be scrutinized in minute detail, and that any oversight could be leveraged against them. Orley approached this process with a combination of meticulous attention and unwavering commitment. Meanwhile, staff members navigated their own pressures. Fear of retaliation remained a persistent undercurrent. Whispered comments, veiled threats, and the high visibility of Meghan Markle created a climate where every action was measured against potential consequences. Some staff considered leaving the project entirely. Others contemplated seeking external representation or support. Orley acted as a stabilizing presence, ensuring that each individual understood their rights, their protections, and the importance of remaining consistent in their accounts. As legal teams prepared for potential confrontation, Orley also considered the public dimension. Once the evidence became part of a legal proceeding, media attention would be inevitable. Social media speculation, tabloids, and entertainment news outlets would amplify the story, often in unpredictable ways. The director and his counsel discussed strategies to manage narrative control, protect staff privacy, and maintain focus on accountability rather than sensationalism. Then came a turning point. Meghan Markle's legal team issued an initial letter outlining potential claims of defamation and asserting her right to challenge any evidence that painted her in a negative light. The communication was formal, precise, and intimidating, highlighting the legal power at their disposal. Orley, reviewing the letter, recognized that this was the first of many maneuvers in a strategic power play. Yet he remained resolute. The goal was not confrontation for its own sake. It was accountability, transparency, and the protection of those who had no voice until now. The chapter also explores the tension between corporate risk management and moral responsibility. Studio executives faced a dilemma: protect a high-profile star, preserve the production's reputation, or ensure ethical treatment of staff. Each decision carried weighty consequences. Orley, observing these dynamics, realized that the legal threats were as much about influence and perception as they were about law. The courtroom, the media, and the public eye would all play roles in the unfolding drama. Humor and irony emerged in unexpected ways. Staff and some insiders remarked on the absurdity of negotiating ethics and legal risk, while preparing for daily shoots. One crew member quipped, "I never thought I'd need a lawyer to survive a coffee run on set." Another observed the surreal nature of witnessing subtle intimidation being treated as a potential courtroom matter. These moments, though lighthearted, underscored the extraordinary pressures and complexities that had become routine. By the chapter's end, the legal threats were not just looming. They were active, shaping behavior, influencing decisions, and heightening tension. Orley understood that the next steps would be critical. Compiling evidence, protecting staff, and navigating a landscape where power, influence, and law intersected in unpredictable ways. The stakes were immense, the potential consequences far-reaching, and the confrontation inevitable. And yet, amidst the tension, one certainty remained. When the evidence and testimonies were presented, the world would see a narrative that could not be ignored, distorted, or dismissed. The collision of celebrity, royalty, and Hollywood accountability was about to reach a climax that would shock both insiders and the public alike. Legal threats were circulating, staff morale was fragile, and Jason Orley's meticulous documentation was starting to ripple through every corner of the studio. What was meant to be a controlled, professional environment had become a theater of subtle anxiety, whispered conversations, and calculated maneuvers. The drama wasn't in public displays or shouted arguments. It was in the invisible currents flowing between people. Crew members spoke in hushed tones, sharing rumors, warnings, and speculation. Technicians moved carefully, adjusting lights and cameras with an almost exaggerated precision to avoid attracting attention. Assistants hesitated before delivering lines or instructions, overthinking even routine tasks. Every footstep, glance, and tone of voice became significant, magnified by the high-stakes atmosphere and the looming presence of legal scrutiny. Orley observed these dynamics with a mix of fascination and concern. He had directed challenging projects before, navigated tense personalities, and managed demanding stars. But what he saw on this set was unique. The interplay of celebrity, royalty, and legal anticipation created a tension that was almost tangible. A pressure cooker of expectation.